Movies have become so reliant on digital effects that their original footage is often completely unrecognizable from what you see on screen. Here's what these movies really looked like before the special effects were added. Leading man Leonardo DiCaprio and director Alejandro G. Iñárritu weren't the only ones to gain recognition for their work on 2015's The Revenant. From riding a horse off a cliff to an epic bear attack, ILM, the digital team behind the film's special effects, had their work cut out for them. The true hero of this film, though, was Glenn Ennis, the 6'4" stuntman who played the iconic bear.
It's hard on the body. So, on your hands and feet, picking someone up, throwing them around.
Ennis also admitted that DiCaprio was a pretty intense co-star. The A-lister's agony was so believable that Ennis thought he was actually hurting him. Despite failing to recoup its $110 million budget, nobody could deny that 2016's Passengers looked great. Director Martin Tildum wanted to keep the visual effects as subtle as possible. Effects company MPC was behind many of the film's iconic shots, including a beautiful zero-gravity water sequence. However, though special effects may be accessible, they certainly aren't cheap. MPC's visual effects supervisor Pete Dion told Art of VFX, "Morton's aesthetic is definitely biased towards invisible effects, and where they couldn't be invisible by nature, to keep them restrained and to never distract from the drama." Warner Brothers maxed out their $250 million budget for Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, and although the film made tons of money, critics still weren't impressed. Director Zack Snyder received a lot of flack, but he claimed that he and his effects team actually went out of their way to pay homage to the source material. Take Superman's cape, for instance. VFX supervisor Brian Hirota told Art of VFX, "It had to act and feel natural, but on the other hand, behave in an art-directed way and create appealing shapes that remind the viewer of the original comics." That may sound like a nice detail, but it's a safe bet that everyone was too busy trying to spot actor Henry Cavill's CGI-raised mustache in Justice League to go back and notice. The Hunger Games franchise split its final book into 2 movies, and most fans agree that the second was far more exciting than the first. VFX supervisor Charles Gibson described Mockingjay Part 2 as a war film with massive set pieces, saying, "We had to enhance battle action and create believable environments that would hold up for extended coverage." Working closely with production designer Phil Machina, Gibson agreed on a mix of shooting on location and building digital sets, saying that Machina's input on the project and his design approach were invaluable. South Korean director Bong Joon-ho turned countless Netflix users vegan in 2017 with Okja, the touching story of a girl and her super pig. VFX supervisor Eric Yondibor explained that the success of the film hinged on whether the audience believed that Okja, a genetically engineered pig, was real. As he explained to No Film School, "The only way that people are really going to believe Mija and Okja and their little pet friendship is if we have a lot of contact, and if that contact is truly believable. In order to achieve this physical contact, the VFX team created a range of foam props for young star On So-hyun to interact with, including a full bodysuit for the most intimate interactions. Fortunately, the effort paid off, as Okja struck a chord with both viewers and critics alike." The sequel to Ridley Scott's seminal sci-fi classic Blade Runner was a long time coming, and the VFX team felt the weight of the 80s cult classic on their shoulders. Overall visual effects supervisor John Nelson told Art of VFX, "Any fan of science fiction or cinema has a great deal of reverence for the original Blade Runner, myself included. Blade Runner 2049 cityscapes in particular were a huge job, and multiple VFX companies were hired to craft this world in miniature. While the film fell below box office expectations, it did at least manage to capture the neo-noir feeling that resonated with fans of the original so strongly." Before Blade Runner 2049, Denis Villeneuve directed a sci-fi outing that was a little more grounded in reality. 2016's Arrival follows a linguist and a physicist as they attempt to communicate with an alien species. The VFX style was the polar opposite of the Blade Runner sequel, seeming drab and washed out in comparison. VFX supervisor and regular collaborator Lewis Morin told VFX Blog, "Villeneuve wanted nothing to do with any kind of sci-fi movie that we've been seeing recently from Hollywood. He just wanted this movie to feel so real and so boring in so many ways, like ordinary looking." Lewis then talked about a cold, cloudy day in Montreal, where Villeneuve explained that this was what he wanted Arrival to look like. Considering how grey and drab the film looked, it's safe to say he nailed it. Alex Garland's indie sci-fi drama Ex Machina beat out many big-budget films to win the Best Achievement in Visual Effects Oscar in 2016. According to VFX supervisor Andrew Whitehurst, the shoot was so well organized and efficient that they had extra cash to spend on making Ava, the AI, look amazing. He explained that the initial budget would have only allowed them to animate Ava's torso and limbs, and that the extra money let them animate her head and neck as well. Garland also wanted to make sure Ava had romantic appeal. Costume designer Sammy Sheldon Differ explains that her suit, which left little to the imagination, was a massive group effort.
Zack Snyder's 300 made heavy use of CGI, and the technology used to create it had advanced immensely by the time its sequel, Rise of an Empire, came around, which of course meant squeezing every ounce of that tech into the movie. Director Noam Murrow told Forbes, "It's amazing how the tools available 8 years later continue to develop. A major difference is CGI, and the ability to create things in post that are convincing and complex and three-dimensional. The idea of creating a water movie without a drop of water on the set is remarkable." The filmmaker also revealed that they relied on some of the same techniques used in the Oscar-winning CGI blockbuster Gravity. Neil Blomkamp's follow-up to his acclaimed debut District 9 didn't exactly go as planned, despite the star power of Matt Damon. The blockbuster sci-fi film cost a whopping $115 million to make, but only returned $93 million at the domestic box office. But while Blomkamp took full responsibility for the film's failings, the South African director didn't have any complaints about the special effects team, which had to put together over 3 times as many VFX shots as they had for District 9. When Steven Spielberg decided to adapt Michael Crichton's novel Jurassic Park, CGI as we know it today didn't really exist. Spielberg brought on Industrial Light and Magic and tasked them with creating living, breathing dinosaurs using computer-generated graphics, and their efforts proved revolutionary. Of course, it wasn't just CGI that brought the inhabitants of Jurassic Park to life. There were a number of practical effects used too, and ILM mixed it up in the same way for Jurassic World. The 4th film in the franchise used detailed white casts of dinosaur heads that would later be layered with CGI for close-up shots. And they used actors in motion capture suits to make sure their movement seemed real. VFX supervisor Tim Alexander told Below the Line, "It gave us a new natural look for the animation. We ended up casting a person to give us a consistency in the performance. There were individual people being that raptor. We had suits that they would put on with a tail." When George Miller returned to the world of Mad Max with his critically acclaimed Fury Road in 2015, audiences were blown away by the sequel's frenetic pace and visceral action, much of which was achieved through the hard work of inventive mechanics who built the vehicles used in the movie from scratch. The chase scenes were all shot for real, but the final product wouldn't have looked anywhere near as eye-popping if it weren't for the VFX team. Led by supervisor Andrew Jackson, hundreds of CGI artists enhanced over 2,000 shots in Fury Road, from adding characters to creating an epic toxic storm. When Earth's mightiest heroes teamed up on the big screen in 2012, the stakes were high for Marvel Studios and their team of visual effects artists. Jeff White, the film's VFX supervisor, told MTV, "With Avengers, there were so many things to get right. We created a lot of New York City for the film and needed to build flying shots of Iron Man all from photography. We had to build a new Iron Man suit, the Mark 7, and Stark Tower. We had to build the alien race. When you add all of those things up, there were quite a few challenges there. Green screens were used during most of the film's action sequences, so the cast spent a good chunk of time reacting to invisible threats and taking cover from fake explosions. The biggest hurdle they faced was inserting the Hulk into group situations." White explained, "We wanted it to feel very natural when he's sitting in that circle of Avengers. We spent a lot of time working on his skin and his hair and his teeth, just to make sure all of that was believable." To create the illusion of flight, Richard Donner's Superman employed wire rigs to hang leading man Christopher Reeve in front of different projected backgrounds. The film is a classic, and the effects look great in the 70s, but watching it today, it feels as though you're flying with Superman as opposed to him flying past you. Something Man of Steel director Zack Snyder wanted to avoid when he set out to make Superman soar. Snyder decided to use a handheld approach to filming Clark's flying scenes, which meant adding in most of the effects in post. Wire rigs and gimbals were used to suspend Henry Cavill in front of green screens, and the CGI team did the rest. When the first Iron Man movie dropped in 2008, director Jon Favreau wasn't known for CGI-heavy features, but advances in technology had convinced him to change his stance.
I've always steered away from using visual effects whenever possible. That being said, in the last few years, there have been a lot of wonderful visual effects movies where it's beginning to become seamless even to me.
Favreau returned for the sequel, but Shane Black took the reins for Iron Man 3, which contained some of the most challenging visual effects yet. Marvel Studios head honcho Kevin Feige explained, "We wanted the ability to be able to suit up anywhere, anyhow, without a giant gantry. The answer was having Tony Stark design outlets he injects just below the skin, not unlike the comics, allowing him to call the Iron Man suit from anywhere. To pull off the effect, each individual piece had to be digitally added to Robert Downey Jr.'s body after the fact." Years of gymnastics training really paid off for Tom Holland on the set of Spider-Man: Homecoming, the character's eagerly anticipated introduction to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Even with the advances in CGI in recent years, it helps to have an actor who feels comfortable jumping around in tights and doesn't mind hanging around on wires all day long. This was the case with the film's Washington Monument scene. But while that was indeed Holland under the Spidey mask, the monument itself was a fake, erected on a studio soundstage.
We couldn't film at the real Washington Monument, but we built very impressive, very large chunks of the monument for filming.
Holland got up the structure with the aid of a wire rig, though even with his background, it was far from a walk in the park.
We did 2 weeks and every single shot was upside down. And my head just took a pounding, man, from all the blood that was rushing to it.
The CGI Jon Favreau used for Iron Man was nothing compared to what he did for his 2016 live-action adaptation of The Jungle Book. To create an entire jungle around a human actor, they needed to pull out all the stops. The lighting was particularly difficult. The director explained, "It's very hard to fake light and shadow, so everything became about using panels of LEDs to project light. So if we had the kid bowing before the elephants, you have panels where we actually would pre-animate the elephants, and they would cast the shadows on the kid in the exact right way." This meant that 12-year-old star Neil Setti had to imagine the animals he was interacting with, though Favreau was on hand to make the experience as real as possible for the young actor via puppets and actors in blue suits. Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop got the most out of the special effects available in the 80s, using a combination of stop-motion and prosthetic builds to create a movie that was disturbingly realistic at times. In the 2014 reboot, Murphy gets his injuries in an explosion that was created digitally, but the suit he dons afterward was actually real.
And there was a philosophy from the start that we're going to have a head-to-toe suit.
The challenge was building a suit that was mobile and easy for the digital department to add on to. Ridley Scott is no stranger to special effects, but creating the red planet on screen for The Martian may have been his biggest challenge as a director. While some practical effects were used, a huge amount of digital work was required to give The Martian Scott's desired look. VFX supervisor Anders Langlands told Gizmodo, "Ridley Scott is famous for doing his little sketches, which are sort of really cool Ridleygrams. We'd ask, 'What do you want the background mountains to look like in this shot?' And he'd sketch out a little diagram of what they wanted. So you just literally match that and he'd be happy." A lot of time was spent finding the right hue for the skies and arid landscapes of Mars. Though in the end, it was a simple thing that caused the VFX team the most problems: the helmet visors.
But of course, glass visors would reflect the crew and the lights and the soundstage. So all the helmet visors you see in the film are actually added in digitally.
David Ayer's anti-hero ensemble Suicide Squad definitely had its flaws, but few of those were the fault of the many visual effects houses, 18 companies in total, that worked tirelessly on it. Imageworks were the ones who handled the squad's final battle with Enchantress, and the movie's villain proved to be a huge challenge, according to VFX supervisor Mark Breakspear. He told Art of VFX, "Enchantress was a unique challenge as the actress had been shot without a costume, as we had to add it in later to allow it to behave in a way that normal cloth or materials couldn't." Breakspear later told AWN that of the 300 shots they enhanced for the film's third act, dealing with the Enchantress's tattoos proved the most difficult. That was amazingly tricky to make sure it looked like skin, but also had the translucency that we needed to see the subsurface tattoos. Watching Martin Scorsese's ode to excess, The Wolf of Wall Street, the only scenes that stick out as being possibly computer-generated are the one during which Jordan Belfort's yacht sinks, and the one when a lion wanders freely through his office. But a visual effects reel released by Brainstorm Digital revealed that some of the most basic shots in the movie were rendered with CGI. From sun loungers to tennis courts, Brainstorm made plenty of subtle touches to bring the film in line with the director's vision. VFX producer Mark Russell told Digital Arts, "Working with Martin Scorsese, everything is about propelling a story forward and contributing to the film. I feel that with his movies, there is a kind of stylized realism to them that we have to integrate with. The amount of destruction on show in this Dwayne Johnson-led blockbuster definitely doesn't come cheap, but San Andreas actually cost a lot less to make than many of the big natural disaster flicks that came before it. According to Variety, the production budget was only $114 million, roughly half the amount needed to bring Roland Emmerich's 2012 to the big screen. The film's visual effects supervisor, Colin Strauss, was able to keep costs down by employing practical solutions to problems that most visual effects companies would solve with only computers today. As he explained it, you can make a $100 million movie look like a $200 million movie. You can make movies way smarter. CG for the sake of CG is always a mistake.
Effects studio Weta Digital changed the game when they helped reboot Planet of the Apes with a new trilogy of prequels beginning with 2011's Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Producer Dylan Clark had a special amount of praise for Andy Serkis, the industry's top performance capture artist shown as protagonist Caesar, redefining screen acting in the digital age.
Andy Serkis is unlike any other actor. He can inhabit characters that don't speak and emote in ways that you don't really see often.
Fox campaigned for Serkis to get an Oscar nomination, but the call from the Academy never came, much to the actor's frustration. After the release of 2017's War of the Planet of the Apes, Serkis told Independent, "The awarding bodies should not discriminate about this being different. The visual effects render the character just like putting on makeup, except here it happens after the fact. It's digital makeup, if you will." Bringing J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World to life was only ever going to be possible with the help of CGI, and the films made increasingly good use of visual effects with each installment. While early CGI hasn't aged well, the quality of digital imagery from Goblet of Fire onward still holds up. The VFX team had to up their game for the fourth film in the series, as it marked the return of Lord Voldemort. Paul Franklin, the VFX supervisor for Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince, revealed that creating Voldemort's nose was a mammoth task. Franklin told Radio Times, "There's this idea that we put the shots through the computer and it just vanished off his face. His nose had to be painstakingly edited out, frame by frame, over the whole film. And then the snake slits had to be added and tracked very carefully using dots put on his face for reference. That's a lot of work for a couple nose slits, but Voldemort just wouldn't have been the same without them."
He's a great looking nose! Great nose! Wonderful nose!
Thanks for the new wand, Mr. Ollivander! Nothing's too good for James Potter!
Filming this tale of a boy stranded at sea with a Bengal tiger came with a number of obstacles, but the biggest one wasn't the tiger, it was the water. Director Ang Lee explained, "I knew that to make it work with 3D, water had to become a character itself. I've never seen realistic water scenes in movies because water hits one side of a tank wall and bounces back like it would in a bathtub, but we needed to make it work. That's not to say the tiger was easy to create either. Scenes in which Pi interacts with the deadly animal were done using a crude puppet. The rest of it had to come from CGI. Tim Burton was creating stunning visual effects long before relying heavily on CGI, using a combination of practical techniques to bring his vision to the screen. The former Disney artist used stop-motion animation, miniatures, and puppetry to great effect in his earlier works, though when the opportunity to direct his own version of Alice in Wonderland came along, he soon realized that he couldn't do it without leaning heavily on digital wizardry. This means that all the stars of the movie had to do the bulk of their acting in front of green screens. According to visual effects supervisor Ken Ralston, it was a challenge for the whole team. The green screen color, after long periods of time, seems to create a certain aggravation and irritation after staring at it for a long period. It is effective for compositing, but visually and psychologically exhausting to be surrounded by it for extended periods of time. When Disney first announced their intention to remake a number of their beloved animated classics in live-action format, the title that raised the most eyebrows was Beauty and the Beast. A film in which the majority of the supporting characters are animated household objects was always going to rely on CGI, though director Bill Condon has never liked digital effects and actively avoided using them wherever possible. He told IndieWire, "It was important to make everything that could be real, real. I'm not a big fan of CG movies. The idea is to feel grounded in a world and not be distracted by things that felt like additions." Unfortunately for the actor portraying the Beast, Dan Stevens, it was motion capture all the way, plus some stilts to get him to the right height.
It wasn't easy on stilts.
Stevens spoke to both Andy Serkis and Mark Ruffalo about their experiences in motion capture roles, and their feedback left him sweating. He added, "I think I was mildly terrified, but that's really generally what drives a lot of my decisions these days, is calibrating the right amount of terror. Nothing like a Disney movie to get that fear meter up, right?" Christopher Nolan is notorious for using real-life effects as much as possible, and most of the big effects in The Dark Knight were done on camera.
The only visual effect involved in that scene was to remove the ram that they had built inside the truck.
But The Dark Knight still offered some unique CG challenges, especially since it was the first film to shoot scenes with IMAX cameras as opposed to using 35mm and converting in post. Visual effects supervisor Nick Davis spoke to Studio Daily about his experience on the Batman flick, saying, "It was important for the visual effects to look as though they were shot on set. Nolan didn't want the film to take on a gimmicky visual effects look. Taking this route meant that Nolan's first sequel to 2005's Batman Begins was a difficult movie to finish, as the visual effects had to be rendered in a higher resolution than ever before. When it came to creating the look for Harvey Two-Face Dent, Nolan wanted to remove layers, not add them. The VFX team had to digitally remove the skin. Two-Face's exposed eyeball had to be painstakingly animated by hand, as were the subtle changes in muscle tension. The biggest challenge Alfonso Cuarón faced making his space epic Gravity was achieving a realistic lack of gravity on screen. Pulling it off involved an intricate mixture of practical and digital effects.
There are flares and there are mistakes, as it were, but no mistakes. It's all created.
The director talked to Space about the challenges in getting the effects to look realistic, saying, "It took a lot of education for the animators to fully grasp that the usual laws of cause and effect don't apply. In outer space, there is no up, there is no down." Co-stars Sandra Bullock and George Clooney were advised of their movements by real astronauts before being hooked up to a series of rigs created by Academy Award-winning visual effects artist Neil Corbould. It turns out that Bullock not only had to put up with being suspended from wires most of the day, there were electric shocks to contend with too. Corbould explained, "There was a charge in there like the static you feel underneath an electricity substation. If you walked out then touched someone, you'd get this massive shock." It may not have been easy work for the actors, but it worked out pretty well for Corbould, who won his second Oscar for Gravity. Arguably one of the most influential films of all time, The Matrix truly changed the landscape of action movies, with its memorable fight sequences becoming a benchmark for stunt coordinators and VFX artists alike. The term bullet time was coined for the epic slow-motion shots that the movie employed on the regular, which were created by visual effects guru John Gaeta. Gaeta told the New York Times, "The directors wanted to emulate the stylization found in Japanese animation. When we created weather, fire, and smoke, we wanted it to move not realistically, but impressionistically." Raw footage released as an extra on the DVD showed how bullet time was achieved using an intricate setup of perfectly positioned cameras and masses of green screen. Whenever Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy comes up, the first thing most people mention is Andy Serkis's brilliant motion capture performance, though creating Gollum was just one of many challenges Weta faced during the movies. Practical solutions like miniature models and forced perspective were used in places, but the bulk of the visual effects were achieved digitally. Even the interior of Bilbo Baggins's Hobbit hole was computer-generated for some shots. Speaking to AWN, visual effects supervisor Jim Riegel revealed that Return of the King was his favorite of the three movies because of the monumental amount of work he and his team put into the picture. He explained, "Return of the King has more shots than 1 and 2 combined. It's like 1,450. It was mind-boggling to figure out logistically how to do them all. It's something you never think you could have done, and you did it, like climbing Mount Everest." Bill Nighy's character Davy Jones made his first appearance in 2006's Dead Man's Chest, although you may not have recognized the actor under all those digital tentacles.
I was once required to be a squid man in a movie. I was an octopus guy, and I was perfectly happy watching that, because what are you going to say? You don't like my squid? Well then, live with it.
Visual effects supervisor John Knoll was able to develop a method that allowed Nighy to be on set with his fellow actors instead of filming separately in front of a green screen, which in turn allowed him to interact more believably and deliver a far more genuine performance. Knoll described the process to EW, saying, "On a soundstage with 25 technicians staring at Bill and nobody to play off of, that quirkiness would have all gotten ironed out. Somebody would say that gesture is too off or too odd. It could have become a real sort of committee effort."
My squid was world class. My squid was an award-winning squid because the 100 men and women who created my squid.
The post-credits scene in Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales opened the door for the return of supernatural Sea Lord Davy Jones, although Nighy had no part in it. In fact, he had no idea his award-winning squid was even in the movie until a taxi driver told him about it. The season finales on Game of Thrones always have a cinematic quality, thanks in part to the digital wizardry of Pixomondo. Green screen use is kept to a minimum where possible, but bringing the creatures of George R.R. Martin's world into the mix requires some top-notch CGI. Pixomondo's VFX supervisor Sven Martin told the Washington Post that one of their biggest achievements has been making Daenerys' dragons blend seamlessly with the world around them. But all that magic doesn't happen until the dragon scenes have been shot, so how does Emilia Clarke connect with her fire-breathing babies? Green puppets. The actress told Huffington Post, "They have these amazing life-scale models that we use for camera rehearsals for the sake of the CGI people, and I got very attached to them. Fundamentally, they're dolls, I suppose, but it was nice to have something physical that I could really picture in my mind."